Go ahead and start now. My name is Robin Stafford, and I am with the UVA Clubs Network. Welcome to tonight's Behind the Scenes program. I am so pleased to introduce John Sauer to you this evening. Hi, John.
Hi, Robin.
Just so nice to see you again. Some of you may have seen the article about John, the retiring yardman, that appeared in UVA Today a couple of months ago upon his retirement after graduation. That was my introduction to John, and I thought he'd be a perfect candidate for a more in-depth program. We had the pleasure of walking around grounds on a beautiful day in June with John, and I hope you enjoy the footage. I will say it was like walking around with a mayor. He knew almost everyone we passed, and we also enjoyed hearing him talk to some of the current groundskeepers, reminding them to water certain plants, keep an eye on certain trees, etc. We are now going to watch the video of that walk, and then we will return to the Q&A here live with John. At that time, please feel free to enter any questions you may have for John into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And just a note, while you are watching the video, you will hear John refer to LAs, and that stands for Landscape Architects.
Welcome back to the university on a fine summer's day. We're going to take a walkabout, and it's so evident, the charm and the history as we stroll. You'll remember it, and I hope you'll enjoy it. So, we're right here on the north side of the rotunda. We have a beautiful day for us, and right here in front of us is a white oak that Jefferson called the Jupiter of the forest. It was planted in 1992. I planted it myself. And as you can see, and I hope we can get a shot from afar, it's got quite a presence. And that is the one thing that links the grounds all together, no matter how much it changes. Well, here we are. We're on the northeast side of the rotunda, directly opposite of the white oak that we just spoke about. And this is a tulip poplar. Jefferson called it the Juno of the forest. And again, it's one of those trees I planted in the early 90s, but it gives us a flanking Jupiter and Juno of the forest. Jefferson considered his trees, he had pet trees, and he understood the significance and the importance of trees in the landscape and just for being human. And so it's been a great honor to see these grow up to be such nice looking specimens that are going to be here for many, many, many decades. And they'll witness a lot of history and many, many young minds coming through, and they're silent, but they speak volumes. This is the Uteland magnolia here. I have a wonderful story about this tree. I was a supervisor for a time for the central grounds, the historic grounds, and the gardens, and other places across the university. But so I was instructed by the LA at the time to plant this bench. We had benches going out. At one time, you could hardly find a place to sit. And they've done so much in the last decades to make it so agreeable for people to be able to stroll about and have a place to sit. But they asked that I plant it right beside this walk here and anchor it. And so I was considering all these possibilities, and I said, you know what, let's just tuck it up underneath there and see what happens. And that was actually maybe 30, 35 years ago. And it's a special place. Nobody has ever tampered with it. It's never disappeared. And it's actually sheltered. You know, they came up with all these studies afterwards that said, yes, the significance of being sheltered by a tree is not only pleasing, but it's important. And so you can come through here anytime and you'll see somebody sitting there And when it's in bloom, this is the Uteland magnolia. When it's in bloom, oh my goodness, it's something to see. Oh, and I had a coworker here one time that wanted to limb it up so that they could rake underneath it. And I said, no, you can't do that. And so now you still have your children that can get on those lower limbs, as they have for many of their children are coming in and getting up and climbing the tree. And the tree loves it, and the students love it, the children love it, and I love it. I love this grove of sycamores down here, and you know, you just walk about and you know you're in a special spot that's cared for and that has significance for people. Here we are at Carr's Hill, where I spent many decades taking care of the grounds and the gardens, becoming part of the flow of the academic year from up on top, which was really a privileged position because I met people from all over the world, um, and we would chat, and they were all characters in their own way. And of course, I was a character, and we all got along. Um, but I'm going to show you some significant trees up here, and then we'll talk more. This is Dean Bosserman's dedicated tree. He was the dean of the architecture school. Um, and it was dedicated to him. I planted it perhaps in, again, the early 90s. Yes, time kind of mends itself together, but just about that timeline. Oh, and let's go over here and look at this beech tree. When President Castine was president of the university from about 90 until about 2010, so this was probably late 90s. He asked to have a beech tree planted. And so the only instructions I was given when we were placing it, that he wanted to see the beech tree from his office, which was directly across the road here at Madison Hall, and he could see it growing. So we planted it there. And it's funny, I took a branch in and had it be enforced at my office up at Brown College last year, and or this spring actually. And President Castine had just passed away, and we were going through the memorial services and the recognition and the honor him. And I found out from his son, John Castine, who is the principal up at Brown College, that the beech was his favorite tree. Uh, John Castine told me that just days before he passed, uh, President Castine told John that the beech was his favorite tree because you could see it in the understory of the forest. It's a native tree, and he always loved it. And so that only endeared this beech to me even more. And it's a beautiful tree under the canopy of these other large, significant trees, and it's going to flourish. And whenever I pass it now, I think of John Castine's dad, President Castine, who I was a gardener for up here at Carr's Hill. And he was such a nice, kind gentleman, and good for the university. And it's an honor to have worked with him. Oh, and I see it's got beech nuts. The wildlife loves this native tree. It's good for them, and they eat the beech nuts, and I can see them forming for the upcoming year. So this is good news. Let's take a walkabout, and I'm going to show you a guerrilla planting. When I speak about planting, there's always an approved method. It goes through the Arboretum Committee, and you just can't helter-skelter go around planting trees. Well, a bur oak, a magnificent tree, came down over at Brooks Hall, and it fell. It was a century old, 2 centuries perhaps, a magnificent tree, and an alumni collected a seed from it and propagated it. and brought it along as a little whip. And then they brought it to our arborist here at the university and said, I would like to plant this tree. It's a beautiful native tree, a magnificently long-lived tree. And so they nurtured it along for 5 or 6 years, and then they brought it up to me and said, where can we plant it? Well, you know, the ash trees have been declining throughout the eastern coast. And so we've had several come down here at the university that it was just the nature of things. So we planted it here. And so this is a non-approved guerrilla planting of a bur oak that the parent came from over here at Brooks Hall, and it could probably, one day it'll probably see where its parents were because it's going to grow into a magnificent tree that will be here for many, many, many decades. So right in this little quadrant here, I planted this white oak here back in about, 78. So not quite a half century old, but as you can see, again, one of the privileges is watching everything grow. And they do grow. I haven't lost many. And so it'll be around for a long time to come. And it's got a sweet presence. Here, I'm up at Carr's Hill now, and I devoted my working life up here for over 4 decades, really, taking care of the grounds and the trees. And they came through and they had to do some major, major work at Carr's Hill. And so really they took out all the plantings that I'd been tending to because of the utility work. Everything was excavated and it was a fresh start, and it needed that. You know, every landscape should be evaluated and reshaped when the time comes. And again, this beautiful oak here has my hand in it, and other things, and it's the charm. Oh, let's go look at the Coosa dogwoods. Ah, I mean, for instance, Mrs. Herford planted that holly there. She was big on yellow, and we planted hollies, the 3 hollies that were yellow berried, and which is an unusual holly. So there's parts of each president here up at Carr's Hill, and everybody leaves their mark, and that is certainly Mrs. Herford's mark. There's a wonderful history here that is still incorporated in the hill. We call that Buckingham Palace. It was built by 2 students back in the 1860s. There was also a set of dorms up here that are still parts of it, the 2-story cottage. That the dorms actually extended down. They were private dorms, and down here towards this. And then the kitchen was next door. But I wanted to tell you about these Coosa dogwoods. This used to be a parking area, and people would park helter-skelter everywhere, and it wasn't so refined as it is now, or defined. And so Mrs. Herford wanted 2 trees here, and so we planted them. She brought them here, and we planted them, and that was back in the 70s. And my gosh, they're a beautiful tree, and no pest, and long-lived, and they have these multi-trunks that have seasonal interests all the seasons. In the winter, the bark exfoliates, and then of course in the spring, after our native dogwoods have bloomed, they come in and bloom, and then they have these wonderful red fruits on them that the birds love. And so it's a nice tree, and I've spent many an hour under these trees, protected from the sun, pulling weeds. It was a great place to tend to, because it was it was always nice and cool, and you could depend on it being sheltered. So, it's really funny. They had an old man, a true old yard man, when the Herefords came up here, and I can't recall his name, but I can certainly see him now. And uh, he was always, he'd just work around the yard, and we'd see him. And this, and anyway, when Mrs. Hereford came in, she really needed somebody, a young buck, so to speak, and I was the buck. And so my supervisors sent me on up here. The supervisors, they were a supervisor. There was just it was a small department. And in fact, when I started here, there were just 17 FTEs, full-time employees. The rest of them were students and hourly workers like me. So they just plucked me up and brought me on up here and dropped me off. And and I said, okay, here I am. And the Herefords were great. They were just a team of good people that looked after me and looked after the university and looked after their family and were kind and considerate, good people. And just see how far we've gone. Huh, when I first started working here for a 40-hour week, I got $76.79 a week. And no benefits, just paid by the hour, $2.35 an hour. And so I pulled home $76, and then we would go down, because they paid you on a Friday. We'd go down to the banks down here at Ivy and get our check cashed, and then we'd go to Food of All Nations and spend a half day's pay on one of their sandwiches. Back then it was very moderate, a couple of bucks, but that was a half day's pay. So anyway, we lived large. We never had money, but we always had money. And one of the things about being at the university is it's I'm not rich in the sense, well, actually I am rich. I'm rich in every way, but it was always steady. Through the seasons, you knew that you were going to get a paycheck. And so you did your part, you did it well, you worked hard, uh, in the sense that, you took care of things. But Carr's Hill, it's got such a charm to it. I mean, here we are, we're right in the middle of the university, and you can just get swept down and find peace and solitude in this sweet little spot. This is called the Oval Garden. I would come down here to hide because I thought every window up there is looking down at me, making sure I'm working. And so I would just come down here, and because it was it was a different landscape, but it was someplace you could just kind of tuck away and no one would know you're there. Oh, this is a lovely tree here. This is a hybrid oak that a compatriot gathered the seeds and interbred, and hoping that it would be a lumber tree because it grows straight up and it's a beautifully strong wood tree. And so he had one. He said, can I plant this? And I said, sure, plant it right there. And we had another huge oak that came down adjacent to it a couple of years before. And so it's going to be here for many, 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 many generations. And again, a story, because it was actually bred by a compatriot that was just had an affinity for their trees. And here we are. This is a sweet spot. This is the Oval Garden, and it's going through some renovations now, but when it was installed, actually it was a Meade Palmer planting. Meade was a landscape architect from Warrington, and he was a fine plantsman. In fact, his professional license is 0003. So he goes far back. He was mentored by Charles Gillette, a noted landscape architect from Richmond, and wonderful plantsman. He taught plant materials over here at the landscape architecture program, and he would just walk about. And again, he was a plantsman before he was a landscape architect. And he would just talk about plants, and similar to what we're doing now, but he would be focused in on all the plants that surrounded him, and he was a mentor to so many good LAs out there now. And I was able to tag along on several of his jaunts, and he was just a remarkable fellow. But he actually did this plan for this garden back in the 60s. And it was shelved. But then when I believe it was President Castine came on in, we decided to get it back out and got it out of the files and started implementing it. And Meade Palmer was still alive then, and he actually consulted on the project. And it has a charming display. Oh my gracious sakes! I'm looking around and I'm seeing things I've planted, and they've certainly all grown. But all these trees down here have something to tell. Those two dogwoods were planted in honor of John Castine's youngest daughter, Elizabeth, when she had her wedding down here. I believe it was down here. But anyway, those were planted. I planted them for them. Um, it's a sweet spot. Here's a great story. This was they changed the landscape, the terrain quite a bit. It used to slope on down. And so when they created this, it was kind of a bowl and it just held water. It held water. And so they had the engineers come and they all decided to pump the water up and out. And so we were down here in the initial construction, and I had a fellow with me who was just a country fellow, and he said, why don't we just connect drain pipes together and just have it go down the hill and just gravity feed on down, and we have a couple of outlets in the wall. And I said, well, yeah, that works. So anyway, instead of having pumps and pumping it up and out, we just let it flow on out. And in the decades that it's been here, it's never held water. You know, it's always been drains beautifully. So it's just, he had a common sense and he told me, and I listened. So there's another great story here about these pines right behind us. Mrs. Shannon, in the early 60s, when this garden was planned, they didn't have the funds to do it. So she went over here to the forestry department up here on Alderman Road. It's the Virginia State Forestry Department, and just got some small seedlings, and they planted a bank of them on this hillside. Well, they've declined now, and there's just a couple that are left. But in the pre-construction, because they weren't on the original plans, they determined that they should take them out. And I was, oh no, don't do that, because then it would just change the whole atmosphere of the place, because of, well, it was my place to hide. And so when they came up for the pre-construction, Meade Palmer came in with his assistant, and they parked up here, and it was a pre-construction meeting. And he said, now the first thing we have to do is protect these pines at all cost. And I said, well, good. That's a great. I'm glad that we're on. So anyway, and it's always had good vibes ever since then. And you know, it's a sweet little spot that's kind of secret, but it's not. It's certainly open to one and all. But the students over at the A school really know it's a sweet spot, and they can come over here and just get out of the studio. And here they are, and really a sweet, quiet spot. Oh, and these walls here, gosh, you know, this is a work of art. They were done by Shelton Sprouse and Johnny Appleton, two local stonemasons, who, you know, and I was just amazed when they started these walls, because they would go out and collect the rocks, and I watched them, and it was just one rock at a time, you know, and they worked in conjunction, and my gosh, you know, it's a beautiful, beautiful wall. And a work of art, really, in its own self. We're walking down the west side of the Pavilion Gardens now, and each one of them has its charm. And, you know, it really is a signature of the university. And students love to come over here and just sit. And again, there are places of study and places to study. So we used to mow these strips here. There used to be polens that would prevent anybody from hitting the serpentine walls. And they were always a bit tricky to mow and never really had an appearance you liked. And so many years ago, they came through and they replanted them with beautiful plants, depending on their situation, sun or shade, and changed the whole character of the alleyways, and of course the curbing and the proper. Anyway, each generation has its idea of landscape from their perspective. Um, but it's always improving, always evolving, and it's always charming for their time and our time. So well, this is the McGuffey ash that I spoke about up at Carr's Hill. When the McGuffey came down, it was a storage tree, and it actually had limbs that stretched all the way over to the McGuffey cottage over adjacent to the garden. And it actually, the canopy occupied this whole space. Well, when it came down in the early 90s, there were a couple of seedlings that had been propagated by the Virginia Forestry Department. And so we came in and we planted one in its place, but it really felt out of place for me personally. So I asked the LAs, after they'd been in their ground for a couple of years, if I could go ahead and take it up and replant it with another tree that we had from the McGuffey ash. And they said, sure. So my friend and I came through and we literally bare rooted that tree out of the ground. It was a wet, cold February day, and took it over to the university cemetery and planted it over McGuffey's grave. And actually it's a beautiful tree, and one of those non approved plantings, and we planted this in its place, so it'll be around for many, many years. And here's our wonderful gardeners, Brandon and Roland, tending the gardens, which it doesn't happen by magic. It takes hard work and it takes a dedicated staff, and that's what we have, so we're fortunate. It's always been part of me. I'm the Carr's Hill gardener, and I don't know. It's just one of the first things you do in public horticulture is pick up trash. I was picking up trash 50 years ago, and I'm still picking up trash. But you do your part.
So let's get to a couple of questions that came in with the registrations. And the first is that in both the UVA Today article and when you spoke with me, you refer to yourself as the last yard man at UVA. And I was just hoping you could tell us about that title. And
Oh, sure. Thanks, Robin. When I was up at Carr's Hill, we were preparing for an event, and somebody came up and asked the elderly bartender where they could find me. And he said, "Oh, the yard man? He's around here somewhere." And so to me, that was a badge of honor, to be called the yard man from that generation, who understood the connotation of the word, which was just someone who tended the grounds and made sure everything was okay and was around. And so I've often used that terminology, and I kind of trademarked it as my the yard man. And then when I was about to retire, my wife and I were discussing our upcoming. She said, "You're going to be the last yard man at UVA." And I said, "Yes, you're right, because now, everything changes, and that terminology is no longer used, nor is it recognized as a position, and which it wasn't back then. I was a groundsman, but by the same token, it was just that sweet word that I just kind of liked. So I am the last yard man, because now it's all crews and so forth and so on."
Sure. At one point when we were walking on the lawn filming, you said, "Oh, I still remember the day that I was asked to, work on the lawn a little bit, and I brought my pitchfork." Um,
Yes.
so how, just describe a little bit how it's changed in terms of numbers of people and in your time there.
Well, of course, it's grown so large to consider the grounds. The grounds have grown. But when I started, it was a very small department. And then when I was promoted to foreman, when it was the buildings and grounds, and then the physical plat, and now it's the facilities management. And when I left Carr's Hill, when the Herefords left, I was promoted to foreman. And part of my responsibilities were the lawn. And eventually I was promoted to a supervisor. And so the lawn had my signature on it for a number of years. And we went up there, I went up there, and there was horticulture has brought turf management so far along. But back then it was pretty simple. You scratched the earth and threw the seed and irrigated it with a system that you had to get all the irrigation done before the students got up because the water pressure would go right down and you couldn't water. And so it's that way. It's come a long way, and now the staff is just truly professionals. I was the bridge between the World War II generation and the succeeding generations, and horticulture has and the grounds has come a long, long way in those intervening years.
That's good. Yeah, somebody's asking out, when you first joined, you mentioned there were 17 full-time employees. Do you have any
Mhm.
idea how many people are
You
there
know,
now?
I really can't tell you. It's a large department, and I'm guesstimating maybe 60 to 75 are on staff.
Well, I know when Patrick and I were with you, we were impressed that every single, grounds person we ran into, you knew their name and, had a little conversation with them. So
Yeah, it's a
that was
great
great.
crew that works at the university.
Um, so also in the video and on our walk, you showed us an example of what you called the gorilla planting
Mhm.
at Carr's Hill. What is the just kind of the standard process for getting approval to plant a tree on grounds? There is the Arboretum Committee, but
That's
tell us
right.
about that.
That's right. There is an arboretum committee, and of course, the landscape architect, which is overseeing all the plantings. So there is a formal procedure to request a memorial tree, and that office takes care of that, the landscape architecture's office. And the arboretum committee is composed of faculty and uh, staff to oversee the plantings and recommend their recommendations. So again, you just can't go out and plant a tree anywhere you want.
You did tell me about those two grads from McIntyre, though.
Yes, yes. At graduation, I had two graduates from the Commerce School come up to me and wanted to know if they could plant a cherry tree. And I said, sure. And so I pointed out a spot right beside the Commerce School and planted it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful cherry tree that was not approved by the committee, but it has its presence too.
Nice. Let's see, somebody asked, she
Mhm.
said, I understand that there is a horse hitch embedded in the tree to the right and below the big white oak that you opened
Yeah.
with. So right next to the rotunda. Is that true?
Yes, that's certainly true, but it's been enclosed now by the tree itself. It's the makeup of the tree, but for many, many decades, it was kind of encased in the trunk, and now it's kind of grown over it. So, which
Oh
is the
my
nature of
gosh.
the tree.
Yeah, it's neat to know that's in there. Let's see, what else? Oh, you also mentioned in the tour that you'd met some very interesting people in your time there at Carr's Hill. And could you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about Queen Elizabeth's visit and the roses, etc.?
Yes. Well, when I went up to Carr's Hill, Mrs. Hereford was a keen gardener, and she mentored me. I stayed up there with them for a decade, and she created the gardens that at Carr's Hill, the perennial beds, and she taught me how to garden and how to maintain them. And she was very patient with me. And she did all of her own floral arrangements. We had cutting gardens and roses, had 72 roses. And some of my fondest memories were going with buckets of long stem roses into the foyer there, into the kitchen. And she had a room that she did all of her arrangements off the kitchen, the pantry. And I don't know. She taught me the style and the elegance of that art. And so we had a rose up at in the cutting garden called Queen Elizabeth, which was when in the 50s, the Royal Horticultural Society named the rose after the Queen, and we had them. And so when the Queen came to have lunch, and Prince Philip came to have lunch in the renovated rotunda in 1976, Mrs. Hereford did all the floral arrangements, and some of the roses, well, Queen Elizabeth rose was on her table in her
Mm.
arrangement, and so that was very special. And so she was again very good at that sort of thing, and she taught me, and I picked it up and I carried on with her traditions.
It's nice. So I know most of your work was outside of Carr's Hill. But you mentioned just in the green room tonight before the program, we were talking a little bit about the Christmas trees. Um,
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, I was responsible for picking the Christmas tree for Carr's Hill for over 4 decades. And it had some beautiful uh, arrangements that were the globes that you put, the balls that you put on the tree that were hand painted by the wife of the dean of admissions, Dean Blackburn, and they were beautiful scenes of the grounds and the buildings. And anyway, so that was all part of the tradition. And for many years, the tree would fall in the middle of the night, and we always blamed it on the cat. And so we got away with that. I got away with that, but finally, we got a better Christmas tree stand and solved that problem. But so it's always been part of uh, my responsibility.
let's see. Back to the oval garden that you showed
Mhm.
us at Carr's
Yeah.
Hill.
Mhm.
Was that stone wall, somebody's asking, was that mortared or loose? Was it dry stack or
It's dry, it's mortared, but you
it
can't
was
tell
mortared?
it because it's been you know cleaned up and dented. It looks like it's not, but it is.
Uh, let's see. What is the oldest tree on grounds? Do you know that off the
Well, I
top of
would
your
say
head?
it's the Pratt ginkgo with the
Hmm.
horseshoe in it. It was planted around 1860, and I think that would be the oldest tree now
Mhm.
on the grounds.
That's wonderful. My daughter was class of 17, and I asked Richard Crozier, who was in the studio art
Yes. Hmm.
department, who's painted numerous views of the
Hmm. Hmm.
grounds, etc. And he found a picture of the ginkgo that he'd painted, which I gave
Oh,
to her. So I love that tree.
it is a beautiful tree, and every year there's a ginkgo watch for that tree in particular. And when it falls, it falls like golden coins, and you'll see students just really enjoying it and come and they really know that tree and look for that time.
Mhm. Let's see, somebody's asking about, could you say a little something more about the pavilion gardens? Were those gardens each designed by Jefferson?
They weren't designed by Jefferson. He passed away before, but he had the uh, the walls up that they were his gardens, the spaces. But he never actually designed inside the gardens. He was leaving that up, I'm sure, to the professors that, excuse me, were in residence. But when the Garden Club of Virginia offered to restore the gardens back in the after the war in the 50s and the 60s, the landscape architect used plants from that period of Jefferson that he would have known, and they've pretty well kept to that true nature of the gardens. So again, the plantings aren't original plantings of Jefferson's, but certainly the serpentine walls and the space itself was
Mhm.
there when the university opened.
Okay. Let's see. What is the long-term plan for the succession of trees on the lawn as they age out and need replacing?
Again, the Arboretum Committee has set up a plan, and they've distinguished where the trees would be planted to frame the pavilions and so forth, and what species. So they have a grand plan that's followed.
Okay. Let's see, just another quick question. This is somebody who was in the A school and remembers that the ginkgo tree was particularly pungent. Is that still the case?
Well, not that Pratt can go because it's a male, but it seems
Mhm.
like everywhere you go that there's a walk, there's a female that produces that foul smelling fruit in the
Okay.
fall. Excuse me. And it's so funny because we planted a lot of ginkgos in the 2000s with this cultivar that was supposed to be um, male. And it proved that a ginkgo tree takes a couple of decades before it starts fruiting. And so 20 years pass and trees have gotten a presence. And it seems like every tree that we planted is over a walk producing the fruit. So we're having to deal with that right now. And it's just part of horticulture. You win some, you lose some.
Sure, sure. So in a typical year as a yard man, seasonally, for instance, in the fall, planting bulbs, someone asked, are you refreshing the tulip bulbs every season or, are you
Well,
digging out?
certainly the display gardens we are, and if they're in planters and such as like that. But because tulips, you can't reliably say they'll come back every year in their full glory. And so, yes, it's a standard practice to plant fresh bulbs for the upcoming season, especially the
And then,
tulips.
and then what sorts of things were you doing in winter?
Well, there's always something to do in Virginia and on the grounds. We had snow duties, of course, and there's pruning and cleaning up and getting ready for the next season. You know, each season has its charms, and you're always looking for that charm in the next season. So there's always something to do.
That's great. Let's see. So now I know you've just retired and
Mhm.
you and Kathy are gardening your back 40, as we like to call it, in Batesville,
Yes.
just south of town. But tell a little bit about your just continued connection to the university and Brown College.
Well, of course, you know, when I was the last year I was at the university, uh, excuse me, John Castine, the president's son, who's now the principal at Brown College, where my wife and I are fellows, have been since 1998. Um, he found me a sweet little office up on Monroe Hill, South Range, 101. And so through the whole academic year, I was just going to stay a few months, but then I just fell in love with the flow, and I didn't want to truncate my time up there in the middle of the semester. And so I just stayed until graduation. But through that academic year, I just got so totally involved with the flow of the life of the student up at Brown College. And it made me appreciate the college and the university so much. And we had floral workshops, seasonal floral workshops and tree plantings, and it was just really good. And so I'll be coming back, continuing as a fellow, my wife and I, Kathy. But you know, and I've got trees to tend to, and we'll still be very engaged with the Brown College community.
That's terrific. Let's see, question here. Well, I don't know if you know specifics about is it the Yakuza dogwood, the ones that you talked about outside of
Yes.
Carr's Hill in the parking area.
Uh-huh.
This viewer's dogwood is not doing well, the Yakuza dogwood. Do you have any tips?
Oh, it's hard to say. Each one of them is so different, and sometimes they just don't do well, and sometimes they thrive. It's hard to say, really. I couldn't pinpoint anything that they're characteristically very reliable trees to grow up.
And this is another question. Are the grounds, is it a certified arboretum?
Well, it's not certified, but it is a tree. No, I don't know how you would designate it, but it is a tree sanctuary. And of course, the Darden School has opened up a botanical garden and arboretum, which is, golly, what an asset to the school and the university. And it's open to the public, and it's really a great asset to the university. And I'm sure that is a certified uh, arboretum. It's just
Mhm.
well done and well thought out.
That's the one that's behind the Forum Hotel
Exactly.
right there.
And it's
Yes.
open to one and all. They encourage people to visit it. And through all the seasons, there's always
Mhm.
something to see. And it's so well, the signage is just great. And you'll
Mhm.
really be enthralled by it. So I suggest everybody make a point of going over and seeing it.
That's great. So grounds, the university is a World UNESCO Heritage Site. And does that apply to the grounds as well as the buildings or?
Well, I don't know, Robin. I would say, but the buildings and the grounds go together like peanut butter and jelly. And Jefferson was really, he knew the importance of the landscape. And he instilled that in the grounds as far as at around Monticello and of course the university. He knew how important it was. So I think they kind of go together, in their significance in every way.
And I remember you saying when we were walking just that it is, it is a living site. And
Exactly.
so,
It's not a museum, it's a living, breathing community that's always evolving, growing with a different
Mhm.
set of characters coming through. And it's dynamic. It's not static. It's constantly changing and alive. Yeah.
We have another specific plant question on boxwoods. Did you yourself work on the boxwoods in the
Oh
pavilion
yes,
gardens
yes.
or
And
carousel?
yes, we do. And boxwoods have generally declined in horticulturally. There's been problems, but they're coming back with the with solutions. But again, plants go through these ebbs and flows, and certainly the university is known for their boxwoods, and we do try to keep them in good shape. And but yeah, boxwoods are kind of iffy. If they're not happy, they're not going to be happy. But if they are, they'll stick around.
Yeah, this question, do they have a lifespan? This person was wondering.
Well, I was dealing with American boxwood that was certainly 40, 50, 60 years old. And they do grow large in that time period. Um, Certainly, boxwoods have a long life because certain estates like Mount Vernon and such, they're known for their long term. They're
Mhm.
recognized as a long-lived plant, yes.
So there's a nursery south of Charlottesville. You may know it, Saunders.
Yes, yes,
Yes, in Nelson County,
yes.
that has developed
They
kind of
have.
the
They've
disease resistant.
they've been a leading proponent, and they are the ones that are really leading with the new cultivars that resist the problems that boxwoods can have.
Mhm. So we're going to wrap things up, John, but I just wanted to ask you, I know you said, some people retire and their spouses aren't necessarily thrilled to have them around the house all day, but that your wife is very excited to have her yard man back full time. And I'm just wondering what sorts of projects you all have going in Batesville.
Well, she is excited to have a yard man because usually in the spring I would disappear until after graduation, and so that's going to be a change of pace. But by the same token, there's so many good things to do out here. There's stream restoration, and there's we have a good backbone. Kathy's a horticulturalist, and she's given it a good bones. And now all I have to do is kind of clean it up as her yard man, and we'll have a place.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us and
Well,
taking us
thank
on
you,
the tour.
Robin.
And really,
Thank
it's been wonderful to spend time with you. And John did lead a couple of other earlier tours of trees on grounds. And we are going to drop those links to those recordings in the chat. And we'll also include them in our follow-up email for the program. Here they are right now, and we'll also include them in the email. And then there is the Flora workshop that John mentioned that he and Kathy, you conducted that together, yes?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. And what did that involve? What is that workshop?
Well, we just used the seasonal shrubbery and flowers that were around Brown College and
Mhm.
just had the students come up and they made their own arrangements and they could take them back to their dorm rooms. It was quite successful and everybody had a good time.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much. A thrill to meet you and enjoy your
Thank you.
retirement. And we'll hope to still see you around grounds.
Thank you, Robin.
Okay,
Goodbye.
take care.
You too.